I'm living with a very entitled roommate, one of the worst people I've ever had to live with. So imagine my surprise when she hands me a bill on something that I did not agree to pay with. And you will not believe a secret I found out about her, what she's been doing to her neighbor. So, this was a few years ago. I, 28 female at the time, met my roommate, 28 female, on Facebook. We'll call her Brandy. I met her in the marketplace section, and I guess that was my first mistake. I was struggling to find a place and found this place that was close to my work and within my price range. Brandy had lived in the apartment for a couple years already, and was looking for someone to split the cost of rent since it had gone up. We seemed to hit it off initially, and after seeing the apartment in person, I agreed to co-lease with her and split the cost of utilities. I'm gonna be honest, I was 90% sure this would be fine, but that remaining 10% was the part of me saying, it's fine now. But something is slightly off about her. I really should have listened to that 10%. Let me paint you a brief picture of Brandy. She came from a lower upper class family, so she was relatively well off. She was somewhat down to earth, but sometimes her ignorance and entitlement showed through very clearly. One example of her ignorance was when she once commented on how the water in her boyfriend's apartment, first floor in a building on the bottom of the hill we lived on, always seemed to get hotter faster than the hot water in our apartment, which, keep in mind, was the third floor in a building at the top of the hill we lived on. So I just kinda shrugged it off, until she proceeded to say that it was because it took the hot water longer to travel up to our apartment. I immediately did a double take and asked her to clarify. Did she mean travel from the lower floor and to the building to our floor? No, she said. From the bottom of the hill to the top of the hill where our apartment was. Well, I tried explaining to her that that's not how water works, but she kept insisting that it was. So I just dropped it. Once Brandy had made up her mind that she was right, there's absolutely no changing it, no matter how much information you presented. Another time, her boyfriend got her a very lovely arrangement of red, pink, and purple roses for Valentine's Day. Now, if you've ever ordered flowers, especially for Valentine's Day, you'll know that they can get very expensive. And this was a very full bouquet, so it must have been easily $200. I came home and commented on how beautiful they were, and how amazing it was that he got her flowers. She scoffed and said, yeah, but they look like a standard cheap arrangement you could get anywhere. I'm making him buy me new ones. I was shocked. All I could really say was, oh, and walked over to my room. So, on to the main story I came here to tell you. When I moved in, Brandy said that she would pay the bills for utilities, since they were already in her name, and just asked that I Venmo my half to her. She sends me an itemized breakdown every month in the form of a funds request in Venmo, and I would just pay her my half. I guess in hindsight, it was a really naive thing to do, but I agreed. So, one day, I come home from work when she was getting the internet set up at the apartment. When I moved in, I asked for the password to the Wi-Fi, and she sent me a screenshot of a router with the long-generated password. Then mentioned she was getting it set up later that week. I thought that was odd, but I thought maybe she was setting up a specific Wi-Fi just for her work. So, when the technician gave her the password, I of course asked for it. She froze for a minute. Like, she was contemplating if she should, then I asked, or am I supposed to just use the original one you gave me? Like, is this one separated? She quickly says, yes, just keep using that one. I didn't think any of it and agreed. So, for the next 4 months, I continued to pay half of the Wi-Fi without another thought. I did think it was strange that sometimes I would plug my Amazon Fire TV into the TV in the living room and it would just buffer a lot. But when she would use her Apple TV, the connection always seemed so freaking smooth. I didn't get an answer, until one day my boyfriend, we'll call him Mark, was over. We were hanging out in the living room when my roommate wasn't home and wanted to connect his Nintendo Switch to the Wi-Fi. I gave him the password and he immediately pointed out that the signal wasn't very strong. He asked where the router was and I showed him the one that she set up. He told me it wasn't the same router since the picture and the password Brandy had given me was a Verizon router, and the one in the apartment was Charter. We looked for the Verizon one but couldn't find it in the apartment, so Mark followed the signal on his Switch until he had full bars. We quickly realized that we had a full signal when he was standing in front of our neighbor's door across the hall. Wow. So, I then texted my roommate pretending that I'd lost the screenshot of the Wi-Fi password she sent me months ago and asked for her to send it to me again. Instead, she sent me the login and router details for the Charter Wi-Fi in our apartment. It was confirmed. She had been charging me for the Wi-Fi for 4 months and having me steal Wi-Fi from our neighbor Ben across the hall. So I confront Brandy about it and she feigned ignorance, saying that she didn't remember telling me not to use the Wi-Fi in our apartment, even though I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt she had. When I told her that it wasn't fair to me or to Ben that she had done this, she retorts with, "It's fine. Ben owed me money for something, so it works out." I pointed out that any money issues between her and Ben had nothing to do with me, and that she had lied and stolen $140 from me over the course of the past several months. She insisted that she did nothing wrong and that she didn't owe me anything. Well, I was afraid that she would try to kick me out, although I wasn't aware at the time that I couldn't be kicked out, since I co-signed the lease. I'd been homeless for a year prior, struggling to find an apartment in a safe neighborhood that I could afford, due to my low-paying job. This was the first place that was both in my budget and a safe neighborhood, and at the time, I could not move in with my boyfriend because he didn't make much money, and lived in a shoebox-sized studio apartment. So I let it go, and didn't say anything about it for nearly a year. I ended up getting it back when I moved out because, surprise, surprise, we had a huge fight and she told me to, quote, move out of her apartment. But that's a whole nother story. Alright guys, so that's the end of the first post. However, it seems a lot of people were asking about the story, what happened when OP finally moved out, so OP says to brace yourself, because this one's going to be long. If you guys are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe for daily videos. I try my hardest to find all the updates possible, so go ahead and subscribe to show a little support if you enjoy the content, and let's jump into the update. So, in my original post, I talked about my entitled roommate Brandy. And well, that story is how she completely screwed me over with the Wi-Fi bill, giving me the password to our neighbor's Wi-Fi across the hall, and still charging me for the Wi-Fi on our apartment. Well, when I confronted her about it, she denied everything and told me she didn't owe me a cent. So, Brandy and I continued living with each other for the next several months. We remained cordial to one another and mostly stayed out of each other's way. This was relatively easy since the last few months I lived there, she practically lived at her boyfriend's apartment down the hill from where our apartment building was. See the hot water story from the original post if you want a good laugh about how she thought plumbing worked. So, during the pandemic, I started struggling with the loneliness that comes with social distancing. I was really depressed, and one of the main things kept me going, on the days I felt especially lonely, was the cat that my roommate had. I've had animals pretty much my whole life, and their company can really fill the empty void for companionship that I needed. However, as Brandy started spending more time at her boyfriend's apartment, she starts taking the cat with her. Those days were hard, however, because it was her cat and not mine. I never asked her to leave him with me, even though I was really struggling. So I started thinking about getting a cat for myself. I've introduced cats into new spaces and social situations several times before, so I just felt confident that I could do that here. I thought it over for a while because I didn't want to get a new cat only to start going back to work just to leave it alone 90% of the time. I also wanted to make sure I was ready for the lifelong commitment that comes with having a pet. So anyways, I decided to get a cat. I approached Brandy to talk it over with her. At first she seemed open to the prospect, but then suddenly she wasn't, and she told me no, as if I were a child asking a parent for permission. I was so frustrated because I owned the apartment just as much as she did and had always been more than considerate with her. I approached her to discuss it one more time, and she starts telling me how she didn't want another animal in, quote, her apartment, because her cat already lived there. Here are the reasons that she gave. Number 1, cats can't share litter boxes, so that's going to be an issue. Anyone who owns cats knows that they can and do all the time. And number 2, well, it's going to scratch up my couch and rug. Her own cat already did that, and frequently too, so she had to put protective covers on the couch for that exact reason. I explained that I would be happy to meet her halfway. I'll pay for better quality couch covers than the ones that she already had and replace the rug with a different one, if she was that concerned about it. And lastly, her Hail Mary. It was an attempt saying, well, the day you bring another cat into this apartment, I'm going to put my couch in storage and you'll have to put something else there if you want to sit in the living room. I calmly explained that I didn't move in with her for the couch. I moved in for a place to live. And then I told her I'd be, well, fine coming up with an alternative solution for the couch. However, at this point, I was not asking her. I was telling her. She was not happy with this and accused me of holding back on her, telling her I was getting a cat until after we renewed our lease. I explained that I had not decided to get a cat until my job announced that we would all be working from home for at least another 6 months, which was several weeks after we'd renewed our lease. I also told her that even though I wanted to adopt an older cat or a bonded pair, I felt it would be easier to just get one kitten, because kittens are usually easier to introduce into a new environment and new cats. I was trying my best to compromise with her, and she finally gave in and accepted that I was getting a cat. Surprise, surprise, she did not remove the couch, despite her threat. When I finally found a kitten to take home, I let Brandy know that when I'd be taking her home so she would also know and be in the loop. I gave her the plan that I was following from an online pet journal, so she would know how this was going to go. The day arrived and I brought my new kitten home. I brought the kitten into my room, which was ready with toys, food, and new scratching pads. I left her in there to curiously explore with my boyfriend supervising. Brandy asked when her cat and mine were going to meet, and I just reiterated that they weren't meeting that day, because my kitten needed a few days to acclimate to the room and recognize it as her safe place. My roommate practically blew a fuse, started yelling at me that I wasted her time and that I should have explained that sooner. I remind her that I did explain in my text message and that I sent her the plan I was going to follow up so she could see it herself. And that's when she says this. I'm not going to read all of that text. That's like a novel. It was literally a few paragraphs tops. I told her it was her own fault for not reading it, and I've done everything I could to prepare her. We had also had a few in-person conversations about it, but apparently she didn't remember those either. She then starts yelling at me about how I was a terrible roommate, and how all I did was lock myself in my room with my boyfriend all the time, and now I'm just going to do it with the cat too. She then starts complaining about other things I was doing that upset her. She accused me of never cleaning around the apartment. Guys, I literally cleaned my own bathroom, bedroom, and cleaned up after myself in the kitchen. So I remind her that I offered to work on some sort of cleaning schedule with her when I first moved in. However, she had told me, and I quote, she had certain ways she liked doing things, and that she would just do it all herself. I continually checked with her while I lived there, but she kept saying no, don't worry about it. Now, all of a sudden, it was some major issue. She then grabbed our full bin of recyclables, picking things out that were mine and starts throwing them on the floor, telling me I never emptied the recyclables, which I do, and how I left so much stuff in there, and sometimes that she'd have to make multiple trips down to the dumpster just to empty it. I'm likely in the wrong for this next comment, but here it goes. I tell her I've never complained when I had to make multiple trips because of how much alcohol she drank every week, and that I didn't exactly enjoy living with it. Well, with her as a roommate. She's often filling the recycling bin by the end of the week all on her own with just bottles of beer and wine. Well, that did it. She screamed, I want you out. I reminded her that I lived there too and she couldn't just simply kick me out, so I told her she treated me like a house guest, not a roommate. We yelled back and forth and some more before she finally left the apartment and I went back to my room. I burst into tears and my boyfriend comforted me. I no longer felt safe or responsible having a new kitten in the apartment. And to be honest, I wasn't sure if Brandy could kick me out or not. I've never co-signed a lease with someone before. I thought about it all and talked it over with my boyfriend for the next several hours. His apartment did not allow animals, so that was a non-starter, and ended up taking the kitten back home when we had gotten her from. I cried the whole way there. I said goodbye and gave them to the pet carrier I had bought to transport her in so she'd have something familiar to go home in when someone else was going to take her. I cried for the next few days. She was such a sweet kitten, and I wish I've gotten to know her, but I'm sure she ended up in a much better living situation. I installed a doorknob with a lock and a key in my door that weekend and was the only person with a key. I no longer felt safe in my apartment unless my door was locked. Well, I spent almost all my time in my bedroom when I wasn't working at the desk in the public space in our dining and living area. If she was at the apartment, I was usually at my boyfriend's. Finally, I called the apartment complex and asked if Brandy was actually able to be removing me from the lease like she threatened. They confirmed that we co-leased it together, meaning neither could kick the other one out, so I at least had a place to live. Well, guys, get this. She starts being even more cold, passive-aggressive. Her next thing was demanding that I pay her my half of the security deposit. When I moved in, I immediately asked what my half was, and she said, quote, I'm probably not getting the security deposit back for this place, so don't worry about it. Now, she was insisting. I told her I would only give it to the apartment complex because I didn't trust her to not keep the money out of spite, especially considering how she'd handled the situation with her Wi-Fi. She kept insisting I pay her, but I held my ground and eventually she just gave up. So I was destructive when I lived there. If anything, her cat was more likely to destroy something. He'd frequently eaten any food I left unsupervised for less than 10 minutes. Once he took the thick plastic cover off of a rotisserie chicken that was supposed to last me a week, just because he wanted it. Torn lampshades and, well, had even torn down a canopy I installed over my bed twice. She never reimbursed me for any of the damage he did to my property, saying, and I quote, I told you I wasn't getting a cat when you moved in. It's your responsibility because you knew this might happen. Yeah, she was a real peach. Finally, I found out that since I was only a co-lease, I could leave whenever without being penalized for it financially from the apartment complex. My boyfriend asked if I would get an apartment with him, and I agreed. We started looking for places and eventually found somewhere decent and enough space for the two of us. The first apartment we wanted wasn't ready until the second week of the following month, though, so we went in with a better option that compromised for everyone. There was another unit that was available for the third week of the month we were in, meaning I would be leaving earlier than I expected. However, it would be easier for Brandy, who was already planning on moving to her boyfriend in that same week. I decided not to get reimbursed for the fourth week of rent because I figured that would just be petty. Despite everything that happened, I just wanted to leave as peacefully as possible and put the whole thing behind me. We got approved for the apartment and began making plans to move. However, do you think it was that easy? No, of course not. Brandy was a menace. The last month I lived there was during a heat wave, and the air condition worked well in the rest of the apartment, but of course not in my room. Maintenance came over multiple times and kept telling me it's fine, but I really couldn't cool down my room without keeping the AC on high. This was absolutely my fault. I ran up the gas bill every high that month, like 2 times what we normally spent. So Brandy sent me a text with the bill and was furious. I apologized and took full responsibility. However, she said that because she spent so much money over the past month at her boyfriend's apartment, I should definitely pay the full bill. I lost it. I'd put up with this woman's temper tantrums for a full year, and was not about to pay 4 times what I normally paid, simply because she was acting like a Karen, demanding a free 4-course meal because her dish wasn't hot enough. Well, I finally put my foot down and told her no. I told her I would happily pay the difference in cost and she'd pay what she'd normally pay, and I pay what I normally pay, plus the amount that was over usual balance. However, she did not get a free pass on utilities, simply because she decided to live at her boyfriend's for a month. What next? I pay for the full rent too? Well, she told me I was being unreasonable, and that the day I moved out, she would send me one final itemized payment request on Venmo for the full amount of the gas bill, plus all the other utilities and the cost of rent. Well, I shot back with, and I quote, "Okay, since we're penny pinching, and if you do that, I'll send you back the amount you requested, minus the 4 months of Wi-Fi you wrongfully charged me and never paid back, and the last week of rent I won't be living in the apartment, and I will itemize it so you can see everything." Well, guys, she did not take that well. She told me that's unnecessary, and I added I'd pick an early week to accommodate her boyfriend's move-in date. If she was going to be petty about the whole thing, so was I. We didn't speak even the day that I moved. We and some friends packed everything up, stuck it into the truck, and were moved out into our new place by nightfall. The next morning, I received the faded invoice request from Brandy and breathed a sigh of relief when she requested only my half of every utility, including the gas bill and the deductive cost of the Wi-Fi and my last week of rent. I had finally won. Well, there is one more little happy ending. A few prior weeks before the move, a friend got in touch with me with a lady who ran a shelter from her for feral cats and kittens. I offered to donate the toys and food I bought for the kitten that I originally bought home because it made me so mad to look at them. I ended up donating some extra litter and food as well because I just really love cats. When I went to drop them off, she introduced me to a feral mother cat who had just had a litter of kittens. She offered to let me meet them, and I said yes. She put the runt of the litter, a tiny little tortoise shell, in my arms, who proceeded to crawl up my arm and play in my hair. I was in love. 2 months later, my boyfriend and I brought the tortoise shell kitten and her brother, who has been on and off my lap while I type this, to their forever home with us at our fresh new apartment. We've been spoiling them non-stop with love and affection. My boyfriend and I are so happy together in our new home. He kind of saved me by suggesting we move in together, and I could not be more grateful. I love him. Our cats, I love too. I love my life so much right now. It was honestly kind of emotional writing this whole thing. It was sort of traumatic experience, but I'm happy where my life is right now. I haven't spoken with Brandy since I moved out, and honestly, I don't care to. I hope for her sake, well, she's well, and that she grew the heck up because dear goodness almighty, she needs to grow up. Alright guys, so this was a crazy story. I could not imagine living with Brandy or any other person like that roommate, but there was a comment. It's kind of funny at start, and then it gives a little bit of information. It says, "Those of us who made it to the end have read more from you than Brandy ever did." But seriously, I'm glad you ate out and you're happy. I have some crazy roomie stories of my own, and your tale was a bit triggering. But I live in my own home now and had a full feral turned spoiled indoor queen of the house to keep me company during the pandemic. My heart broke for you in that part of the story with your cat. I'm glad you now have a wonderful fur babies. So guys, there seems like there's a lot of people who can relate to this type of story. Let me know in the comments down below, what is your craziest roommate story that you've ever had in your entire life? Drop it down below. I'll add mine. I hope you guys have a fantastic day. I just want to thank you for joining me. And just know, the best way to support me is just by subscribing. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow. Peace.